Gaze is a term you're starting to hear a lot in media analysis videos like this one. The issue of a film's gaze is often talked about in feminist circles of film analysis, and while our basic understanding of the term has changed a lot over the years, and its current iteration in internet discourse has been adapted quite a bit in order to account for other philosophies of film analysis, at its inception, talking about a film's gaze was a way of talking about who the subjects and who the objects were in a piece of media. Subjects being the characters that the audience identifies with, and objects being the ones that the audience looks at through the eyes of the subject. Fundamentally, this is a question of perspective. Identifying who's doing the looking and who's being observed is maybe the most basic form of media analysis. And the propensity for the lookers to be strong, straight, cis men, and the looked at to be young, attractive women is something that's been discussed for years. The language of this form of gaze, what we have come to call male gaze, is so ubiquitous and ingrained into our culture that even critiques of it often can't escape its influence. Sure, you can have a compelling romance, you can have fun adventures, you can even try to write a three-dimensional female love interest. But at the end of the day, she still needs to be the love interest, not our thought interest. I say this not just to recap this episode of The Whole Plate, but also because Burning, a 2018 film by Lee Chang-dong, is a film all about perspective. And if the first question we ask a piece of media is whose perspective is this, Burning gives us our answer right away. This is Jong-soo. He's a struggling writer who's trying to make it in Seoul. He's moving into his dad's shitty house in the boondocks while said dad is in jail. Otherwise, Jong-soo just feels directionless. You can see it from the first shot. But on his way home from work, we meet Hai-mi, an old friend of Jong-soo's who he used to bully. She works as a greeter for supermarkets now, and her bubbly personality makes Jong-soo instantly swoon. She's quirky, spontaneous, and excited by life, where Jong-soo just feels depressed by it. They go back to Hai-mi's apartment to, well, have sex, but also so that she can ask Jong-soo to watch after the place while she travels to Africa. She also has a cat that may or may not exist. So off she goes, only to return with Ben. Ben is unreadable. Equal parts charm and menace from the second we're introduced to him. He appears to be Hai-mi's new boyfriend. The three of them meet up a few more times over the next couple of weeks as Hai-mi and Ben get closer and Jong-soo gets pushed farther away. They have dinner at Ben's lavish apartment, party with Ben's rich kid friends, and finally go to Jong-soo's house to have dinner and watch the sunset. The three of them smoke weed and hang out until Hai-mi takes off her shirt and dances to a Miles Davis song coming from Ben's car. She heads inside, and while they're alone, Ben reveals his secret hobby to Jong-soo.
난 가끔 비닐하우스를 태워요. 뭐라고요? 가끔 비닐하우스를 태운다고요. 난 비닐하우스를 태우는 취미가 있어요. 들판에 버려진 낡은 비닐하우스 하나를 골라 태우는 거예요. 한국 경찰이 그런 데 신경 안 쓰거든요. 한국에는요, 비닐하우스들이 진짜 많아요. 쓸모없고 지저분해서 눈에 거슬리는 비닐하우스들. 걔네들은 다 내가 태워주기를 기다리는 것 같아요.
It's from here that things take a sinister turn. Jong-soo becomes obsessed with this idea, that of burning greenhouses, and jogs across his neighborhood to catalog all of the potential greenhouses that could be burned. It's on one of these jogs that Jong-soo starts to suspect that Hai-mi, who's been avoiding his calls, might be in danger. The way that this is revealed is, well, fantastic, but also very in keeping with Lee Chang-dong's aesthetics as a director.
여보세요.
여보세요, 준? 여보세요? 예? 무슨 소리예요?
I'm not really interested in dissecting the mystery of burning here because there's like a billion videos doing that already, but I think the reason that so many people want to discuss it is because of the way that Lee Chang-dong presents information. All of Lee Chang-dong's films revel in ambiguity. They don't like to give answers or really even pose questions as much as they just present details to you and let you do with them what you will. Did the teacher's daughter help him kidnap Shin'e's son? Did Mija sell her grandson out? And, of course, what happened on the other end of this phone call? We'll never find the answers to these questions, and that lack of resolve is what gives director Lee's mysteries their compelling draw. Even before the disappearance happens, everything in the movie is presented through this vague, indirect lens. Characters will often do things without the audience knowing why, the true meaning of their actions becoming clear as the movie moves forward. This creates the perfect tone for a mystery. The audience is so tuned into the wavelength of the film that when details from the past come back later, the movie doesn't need to telegraph what they mean to you. It relies on the audience being perceptive and creating the "holy shit, he totally did it" moment entirely within their heads.
영아, 광아, 보이라.
With the ambiguity of Lee's films comes the other two staples of his narratives, critiques of religion and critiques of masculinity. The religion part is pretty obvious to anyone who's seen Secret Sunshine, but when it comes to masculinity, I suspect that this claim might raise some eyebrows, especially for those of you who are watching this video without having seen Burning. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Is Jaime a manic pixie dream girl?
Blah, 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 blah.
The manic pixie dream girl is a trope so well known and discussed that even as we examine it, we seem to reinforce it as an actual role that women must fit themselves into. As journalist Laurie Penny says, "I'm fascinated by this character and what she means to people, because the experience of being her, of playing her, is so wildly different than it seems to appear from the outside. In the recent weeks, I've filled in the gaps of classic manic pixie dream girl films that I hadn't already sat through, and I'm struck by how many of them claim to be ironic reimaginings of a character trope that they fail to interrogate in any way. For the blessedly uninitiated, the manic pixie dream girl is a young, playful, quirky love interest. She has eccentricities, unique interests, brightly colored hair and outfits, alternative music tastes, or at the very least a middle-aged Hollywood writer's version of alternative, and a childlike wonder for the world. Narratively, the manic pixie dream girl usually serves as the motivation for a male main character to get his shit together. Down on his luck? Depressed? Stuck up? No problem. The manic pixie dream girl can fix him. It's also worth noting that fixing him usually takes the form of aggressively coming on to him and sex. It is, in many ways, the ultimate male nerd fantasy. You may be broken and sad and isolated, but she's the answer to all your problems. You don't have to be interesting or charming or brave. You don't even need to risk vulnerability. She'll do all that for you. I don't think it's a coincidence that nearly every manic pixie dream girl pursues her male love interest first. When you're a young guy that's let your life be defined by the edict of toxic masculinity, the girl doing all the scary, risky, vulnerable parts of relationship starting can be the ultimate fantasy. When the trope is handled by a competent director, the character can manage to be a full three-dimensional person, and when it's handled really well, it might even say something about relationships themselves. But the majority of what we get today are attempts at the latter that just wind up being standard pixies, but with a twist. Like, look, Bo Peep is butch now. And so we return to Jaime. Jaime is, for the entire first half of Burning, an almost cartoonish manic pixie dream girl. She mimes peeling a tangerine in the same way that Kristen Dunst's character in Elizabethtown mimes taking a photograph. She aggressively pursues Jong-soo, having sex with him only an hour after they've reconnected. She might not have dyed hair, but her brightly colored outfits and luggage more than make up for it. See, she's not like other girls. She listens to Miles Davis. Through the lens I've presented, it seems like a pretty clear presentation of a manic pixie dream girl, who's then fridged as the cherry on top. But it is just through that lens. Because, you see, Burning is a film about perspective. And it's at this point that I have to admit I've been lying to you. The Burning that I described to you is burning through the eyes of Jong-soo. Let's go back, and if you'll allow it, I'm going to walk you through the plot points of Burning again, but this time from a different point of view. From his first frame on screen, Jong-soo is a broken person. Where Jaime is fun and Ben is charming, Jong-soo is just nothing. He is totally isolated from society's image of him as a lawyer, author, businessman, or successful entrepreneur, both mentally and physically. Instead, he's stuck shoveling cow shit in the countryside. He has lost all sense of direction. It's into this world that Jaime makes her appearance. Jaime is, as with every character in this movie, unreadable. We will never know every aspect of Jaime's personality, because to be young and poor, as both her and Jung-soo are, is to be isolated, and to be isolated is to be unable to truly know another person. Jaime does fuck Jung-soo, but, and this is vitally important, not for his benefit. In fact, it's implied that fucking Jung-soo is more of an attempt to get back at him for his harassment than any attempt to fix him. And, of course, this doesn't fix him, but Jung-soo thinks that it will. It's perhaps fitting then that in a movie about the role society makes for us, the main character is a writer. He's not only trying to write a story, he's trying to write a path for himself, and if Jaime can fill the void of an actual functioning relationship, then so be it. Jaime to the rescue. Which is fine, except for the fact that Jaime does not give a shit about this guy. I mean, she likes him, at least enough to hook up and hang out a few times, but that's really where the relationship ends for her. Jung-soo is just a dude. And so Jaime returns from Africa with someone new, someone who's actually charming. And boy, is he. Ben's role in the narrative is complicated, so we're going to put a pin in that discussion for now, and we'll come back to it later. After Ben's arrival, we get a lot of Jung-soo being a dead fish, flopping around aimlessly as Ben is infinitely more charming than him, with the one scene of interest being this one. Ben's friends meet with everyone at a restaurant to hear about his trip to Africa. Jaime regales them with tales of the African dance she witnessed in a very touristy way. Side note, whether you read this scene as being a really good depiction of tourists appropriating other cultures or as a writer appropriating other cultures thoughtlessly probably depends on how much you like burning. For what it's worth, I think the movie handles it mostly fine, but the constant use of foreign-y iconography to build intrigue is, well, it's there, and I think it was important to mention it. She talks about the difference between little hunger and great hunger in the dance, little hunger being literal physiological hunger, and bigger hunger being the need for meaning. This then culminates with Jaime's dance. At Jung-soo's house, she removes her shirt, stares out into the sunset, and begins to sway. This begins as a stoned woman vibing to a good song, but the scene slowly evolves into something different, something gut-wrenching. The peppy personality and quirky character traits melt away, and what we're left with is desperation. A cry for help. It's a genuine cry of hunger for, well, everything. Meaning, understanding, resolve, life. It breaks Jung-soo's perception of Jaime wide open. It allows her to be vulnerable and desperate and messy in ways that the role he made for her would never allow. And instead of seeing all of that, all that Jung-soo sees is her breasts.
너 왜 그렇게 옷을 잘 벗어? 남자애들 앞에서. 창녀나 옷을 그렇게 벗는 거야.
Here's where Jaime first disappears. Not because of some nefarious rich kid, but because of hurt. She was just done with Jung-soo's shit. Now, I know that just applying a feminist lens to a story doesn't magically make feminist text exist where there is none, but that's not what's happening here, and I know that because of the second half of Burning. As Jung-soo interviews other people in Jaime's life to try and gather clues, we find out some stuff that makes us reevaluate how we saw Jaime. Turns out, peeling that tangerine wasn't a quirky pantomime game, it was a genuine expression of economic disparity. She literally couldn't afford to eat tangerines because, turns out, she was drowning in credit card debt. Those mime lessons and trips to Africa were expensive treats that she could not afford. Also, it turns out, Jaime had no connections to her friends and family, who abandoned her because of her debt. She was just as isolated as Jung-soo was, and he pushed her away with his toxic bullshit. Burning is a film about perspective, and everyone is limited by their perspective. Jung-soo's by his masculinity, Jaime's by institutional sexism, and everyone by their economic class. And then there's Ben. Ben exists on the outside of all of this. He lives comfortably, he has lots of friends, and he seems content with himself. As such, Ben is the least knowable character in the movie. The rest of the cast is so separated from his unachievable version of wealth that they aren't capable of understanding who he is or how he operates. And, as the mystery starts to unfold and it becomes increasingly clear that Ben has probably murdered Jaime, his slick, tech-bro-y charm goes away, leaving only the inherent menace that Steven Yeun brings to his performance. Let it also be known that with this performance, Steven Yeun cements himself as one of the top 5 hottest actors alive. Yes, I do keep a running list, but this is also where the narrative starts to get a little bit questionable. Because as the film spins towards its horrific, inevitable conclusion, a lot of things that really work in the first half come back to shoot the film in the foot. I talked at length about the strength that ambiguity gives Burning, but because of this ambiguity, the plot can almost come across as a creepy stalker breaking into a girl's apartment after she pushed him away. Except it turns out she was murdered, so it's fine. And while we're here, I think we need to be a little more critical of how Burning dissects the trope it seems so interested in exploring. As Laurie Penny points out in her article, there are quite a few manic pixie dream girls who get killed off to, for lack of a better term, preserve their innocence. Can a film that does this truly be saying something profound about the roles that women are cast into? And furthermore, if you want to critique masculinity, can you really do so fully while still positioning your narrative from the perspective of the toxic male asshole? Because, try as it might to subvert expectations, Burning still replicates the images and plot points of films steeped in the male gaze. And in doing so, it absolutely explores the perspective of an isolated male asshole, but fails to explore perhaps the most important perspective to have in these conversations: high knees. However, even in critiquing this aspect of Burning, we arrive at Burning's ultimate thesis. Don't get me wrong, it is both beneficial and necessary that we question how subversive a film trying to critique the way men treat women can be when it refuses to put women at the center of its narrative. And don't think what I'm about to say excuses Burning's failure to do so, but I don't think we should lose sight of what Burning is actually trying to say. There's one more plot point that I haven't gotten to yet, and it's the strangest in the entire film. Towards the end of the film, Jong-soo's mother arrives, trying to reconnect with her son after being apart for years. The conversation goes poorly and ends when Jong-soo asks if there was ever a well on Jaime's property when they were younger. Jaime told Jong-soo a story about him saving her when she was trapped at the bottom of a well which, according to both her family and the current owners of the property, never existed. But lo and behold, his mother disagrees.
옛날에 우리 동네 가운데쯤에 해미집 있었잖아요. 근처에 우물이 있었어요.
우물? 있었지. 물 없는 마른 우물.
해미가 거기 빠진 적 있다던데.
그건 모르겠고 우물은 있었어.
Who is Jaime? Is she the girl who saves you? The friend who makes you laugh? The pitiable worker? Or the sister who betrayed you? The answer is that she's none of these things. Jaime will never be truly understood because everyone was too removed, suffering too much under other systems of power to help her. And the tragedy of Burning is this loss of life and the lack of understanding in it. A lack of understanding which matches the stories of many young people. The ending of Burning would feel triumphant in any other movie, the release of the tension built up over the last 2 hours. But it doesn't. If it did, it would accept Jung-soo's perspective, that Ben is his villain, Jaime his princess, and violence the only way to save her. Jung-soo's final actions don't save anything. They don't bring justice. They certainly don't solve the mystery or tell him anything about who Jaime really is. If I reach the ending of Burning and only feel sick, empty, and regretful, then how can I say that the film is supporting Jung-soo's perspective uncritically? To do so is to ignore all of the context that Burning surrounds itself with. Burning is a film about perspective, but it's also a film about young people struggling to find meaning in a world that offers no support, only images of what they should be, images which they can't help but absorb. And of all the young people in the film, the one I relate most to isn't Jong-soo or Ben, it's Jaime. As a viewer, I don't feel a sense of ownership over her, I just see a part of myself, out there, dancing, craving something more that will never come.